Hello, everybody, and welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 11th of July 2025. For those of us who listen, for those of you, not us, who listen to us from Northern Ireland, have a happy 11th night and a good marching day on Saturday. For the rest of us, we're just going to enjoy the heat wave. It's swelteringly hot down here in Tipperary, where I am. All the local exhibitionists have gotten their, and they're all men, by the way, have gotten their chests out and are walking around with no tops on. I wish I had that confidence. Sarah, how are you?
Is it that hot yet? It was pretty hot
26
today.
degrees here.
I don't think there's any temperature where it's appropriate for men to be walking around shirtless in the street, but that's just me.
Well,
But yeah,
you're in a
it's
minority amongst, yes, the male population on that one, I am afraid. Anyway, there's lots to... No, I was going to lie there. I was going to tell a lie and say there's lots to talk about this week. I'm the editor of a national news platform, and I have to say this has been, Sarah, the slowest news week of the entire year. There's been very little of major consequence that happened, but there have been a few things. So we're going to talk about the Epstein files, because Donald Trump made a big announcement in relation to those this week. We're going to talk a little bit, Ben and Jason on that other podcast covered it earlier on in the week about the UN wanting us to rerun the referendums we held here last year. There was a new report by the Institute of Strategic Dialogue into the badness of the far right in Ireland. We're going to talk a little bit about Javier Milei down in Argentina, who's been doing so well that he basically has vanished from the Irish media. And then we might get to the most recent developments with the Occupied Territories Bill and the presidential election and a whole bunch of stuff like that. Anyway, Sarah, we'll start with events from the United States this week, because this is one of those topics that never quite goes away. People have believed for years that Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself and that he may have been silenced. This has been a popular conspiracy theory. He may have been silenced to prevent him revealing what he knew about the rich and powerful in the United States. Donald Trump, when he was running the election, he promised to reveal all the Epstein files, everything that was known about Epstein. He appointed a load of people like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, who were massive Epstein truthers, to lead the FBI and the Department of Justice, and told them to release everything they had. And this week they released all the documents, and their conclusion was Jeffrey Epstein killed himself and there was no client list. You must be very happy about that, are you?
I don't really have a strong opinion on it either way. But I'm sure you do.
That's no good. We're trying to do a podcast here.
I'm sure you do. No, I'm just going to let you. I'm just going to let you have your little. Go on.
I don't have a strong opinion on it either way. I look. There's no doubt in the world that Jeffrey Epstein was a really, really
Dark
bad dude,
and
that he engaged in the wholesale trafficking for the purposes of sex of young women. And the question has always been, to what purpose did he do that? And I suppose there are two schools of thought. There's the school of thought that says, look, he's just a perv who kind of liked having a harem of women for his own use that he might occasionally loan out to other people. He wouldn't be the first person in human history. There was I don't want to get the country wrong, but there was a sultan in the Far East, I know, who his younger brother maintained a harem of very Western women for many years, and some of them have spoken out about it. I think it was Brunei, but I could be wrong. So he wouldn't be the first guy to do that. And then the second theory, which was a theory, was that Jeffrey Epstein was in fact a master of sort of intelligence gathering, and that he was recruiting very wealthy and powerful people to come to his island and putting them in compromising positions and then blackmailing them and then extorting them for money or information that he was using to enrich himself, or indeed some other unknown entity, possibly an intelligence agency, in the background. And obviously the second theory there is the more compelling one if you're kind of somebody who's mad into politics and wants to believe that there are unseen forces shaping the narrative in the Western world. And I think that's why it's very popular. But I also think that there is staggeringly little evidence for it that has been released. And now Trump's own FBI and Trump's own Justice Department is saying that there is no evidence of it, and they believe that that basically what we know in the public domain is correct. But a lot of people still seem to be skeptical. I don't know whether they're right, but I don't see any evidence that they are. And I think when you live if you want to exist in a rational world, you have to demand evidence for your beliefs. And unfortunately, for whether the evidence exists and the Trump administration is still withholding it, or maybe it just doesn't exist. So that's my summary.
I mean, I think that, Jeffrey Epstein killing himself or Jeffrey Epstein being dead was extremely convenient to a lot of powerful people. And so I think it is, completely understandable that a lot of people would think that something untoward happened there, given that he just suddenly killed himself one day and that was very much a relief to a lot of people in power. I mean, on the balance of everything else, I think that a Trump administration probably would have been absolutely excited and determined to find any evidence that they possibly could that there was something untoward. And if they didn't, well, then you'd have to kind of begin to accept that maybe there is no evidence. But I still think that will always be a mystery and that will always be suspicious. And sometimes there are coincidences, and maybe it was a coincidence, but it was a very, very convenient coincidence for a lot of people.
Well, look, a couple of weeks ago, Elon Musk took to social media and he said the reason the Epstein files have not been released is because Donald Trump is in them. And then he withdrew that accusation, or appeared to withdraw. He said, I went too far, or whatever. He didn't actually say I withdraw the accusation. He said some of my tweets went too far. And I'm not making any assertion there because I won't, but I do, and there's no evidence to stand it up. But there is as much evidence in relation to Trump as there is in relation to, say, Bill Clinton or anybody else. I think one of the problems, if you want to try and understand where your own thinking on this is if you find yourself in a position where you definitely believe some shady stuff went on there with William Jefferson Clinton or Bill Gates or other people who you're not well disposed to, but you also at the same time believe that Donald Trump's photographs with Jeffrey Epstein were entirely innocent, then you're not actually basing your beliefs on evidence. You're just transposing your own prejudices onto a set of facts and coming up with the story in your own head. And that I think is unfortunately what a lot of people do in the modern world, for better or worse. I think one thing I think intuitively about the Epstein thing is that not every man, and certainly not every man who you don't like, is a pervert or a predator. Yeah. And there is definitely somebody whose name has been publicly linked with Epstein. Just on the balance of probabilities and the raw numbers, there's definitely somebody whose name has been publicly linked with Epstein who is entirely innocent of any wrongdoing and had their name dragged through the mud. I don't know who that is, but I think on balance of probabilities, there's definitely somebody, because it's just not believable that all these people who you don't like, who've been linked with this guy, have all been going to this island to engage in sex with children, or indeed, or underage women, which is one of the worst crimes you can commit in our society. It's just not believable. And if you believe it, you're probably motivated in your belief for it. And I think we should always try to distinguish in our own heads the difference between things that we can base on factual statements and things we want to be true. I think with the Epstein thing, there's an awful lot of people who want it to be true because it would just suit their narrative, except in the case of Donald Trump, where it wouldn't suit their narrative at all, so therefore they dismiss it, right? That's what they're doing. I think we see that
goes both ways, John, because there would have been people before Trump got elected who would have been saying that it was all nonsense and saying what you're saying. And then when Donald Trump started to come into the frame, then all of a sudden they started taking it seriously. So that goes both ways.
Yeah, by the way, for the record,
whatever about logs on flights and different things, I'm always I always think that people, and it's just my experience or my opinion, but I always think that people give way too much credence or give way too much weight to photographs, people being photographed together. You're John McGurk, you're the editor of Gript. You could be at an event next week and somebody could say, oh, John, can I get a photo? It doesn't mean
has happened to me.
Yeah.
It's happened to me on multiple occasions. Yeah.
Exactly. And so let's supposing somebody says to you next week, oh, John, can I get in a photo with you, whatever? And then you're like, yeah, no problem. Like, because why wouldn't you get in a photo with these people? And then all of a sudden, the person who's in the photo with you turns out to be some kind of super creep, a murderer or whatever. Does that mean now that you're friends with them? Like, do you know what I mean? I just think sometimes they'll just, like, photos, especially people who are high profile, they're probably photographed with people all the time.
Yeah. I just want to say for the record, because I know I'll get the usual people in the comments accusing me of Trump derangement syndrome for mentioning Trump in relation to Epstein. I don't believe for 1 second that Donald Trump did anything, I'll rephrase that. I don't believe for one second that the American administration has any evidence of Donald Trump being involved in any way in any wrongdoing with Jeffrey Epstein. Because if they had, it would have been released during his 2 runs for president.
Exactly.
Like they would have been. There's no way they would have sat on that one, right? These are the people who indulged in a public fantasy about a particular tape existing of Donald Trump in Moscow that also, I think, was an absolute fabrication. I mean, if they had any hard evidence, they would have released it years ago. I don't think Donald Trump has a great record in relation to his relationships with women. And I think the tape that was released of him,
but they were able to dig up a stupid audio tape of him, acting like an asshole, locker room talk with other guys. So, they obviously dredged the lake for what it is, for what it's worth, for anything they possibly could have on him. So if there was anything like that, it would have been published long ago, as you say.
The other thing here is, though, and before we move on, because I want to talk about this, and it's not to get digs in, it's not to anything like that, but like it does need to be said. A lot of these people in the Trump administration, Dan Bongino, who is a podcaster, Pam Bondi, his Attorney General, Kash Patel is head of the FBI. They traded for years on whipping people up into this, the Epstein stuff is real. There are tapes, there is records, there are flight logs, there is the FBI has all the evidence that like this cabal of powerful people around Epstein were involved. And if you just give us power, if you give Donald Trump power and he puts us in charge of the FBI, we'll bring all that information out and we'll put it into the public domain and we'll have full transparency. Now, for those people to now turn around and kind of go, we've seen the files, there was nothing there, move on. I just think the cynicism of that, the cynicism of stating things, and they did, by the way, stating these things as fact. I mean, it is not that long ago since Pam Bondi, who's Donald Trump's Attorney General, Sarah, went on Fox News after she was his Attorney General and was asked about the Epstein files and said, they're on my desk, I'm going through the Epstein files, deciding what to release. And then she had a performative thing at the White House where she released these binders with all the Epstein details in them. Turned out to be absolutely nothing revelatory in those either. I just think the way this has been whipped up politically has been really corrosive. And I don't think, if it was on the other side, if it was a left-wing administration doing this, if it was left-wing politicians doing this, whipping up a conspiracy theory that they never intended, I don't think, to stand up or never really fully believed in, I think people would have no trouble saying it was appalling behavior. And I think it was appalling behavior on the behalf of these people, and indeed to some extent Trump himself. Even though I'll get in trouble for it.
I think the left do their own fair share of whipping people up into a frenzy about whatever it is that they want to whip people up into a frenzy about. Like, to suggest that they don't is
I didn't suggest that they don't.
But you're saying that if they'd whipped people up about a conspiracy theory, we'd be calling it out. They do it all the time.
No, we would.
They do it all the time. But anyway, the point
can
is...
you think of any recent examples?
Well, I
don't think there are any recent examples as egregious as this one, if I'm honest.
Really? Well, what would you prefer? Would you prefer it's the same with Robert F. Kennedy and all the vaccine stuff and whatever. If he does all this investigation and it comes to nothing, I'm happy that the investigation was done at all.
But what investigation? This is another example. I mean, if you bring it up, I mean, Robert F. Kennedy, before he became the U.S. Secretary of Health, described the COVID vaccines as a bioweapon. And I'm not quoting him directly because I don't have the quote in front of me, but he described them as one of the most dangerous vaccines ever administered in the history of the American state. Now, he's now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He has had the power to authorize an investigation into what happened. He has had the power to release all the contracts that were signed. He has had the power to release the global vaccine safety data held by the US government, if it confirms any of his fears. He has had the power to do loads of things to substantiate. I mean, one of the things that really annoys me in this job, and I make no apologies for saying that annoys me in this job, is that people who are really concerned about the vaccine stuff, Sarah, write in every week. Why aren't you covering the vaccine story? I've said this on the podcast. Why aren't you demanding answers? How many of you are emailing Robert F. Kennedy, the guy who told the world he was going to get answers and has gone in as Department of Secretary of Health and Human Services and provided none? Provided none.
6 months ago. 6 months ago.
It's a pretty long time, Sarah.
I don't think that's a long time to do an investigation of what the causes are, what the damages is of certain vaccines. I don't think that's a long time.
Well, it must be a secret investigation because he hasn't made the existence of any investigation into the COVID vaccines even public.
Well, maybe it is. I just don't think you can. I don't think you can annihilate his record for doing or not doing things when he's in the job 6 months.
I think you can.
Coming back to my point is that investigations into what happened and what the Epstein files, investigations into vaccines, investigations into additives and things that are in American food, investigations into causes of autism, etc., etc., etc. Let's have it. Let's have it. If it comes to nothing, so what? So
Okay.
it's like, so you're saying about the Epstein thing, oh, they said this and they said that or whatever. But apart from that, if there was an investigation and the investigation has determined that there was nothing in it, do you want them to make it up?
No, I don't. But I think people should be a whole lot more circumspect in declaring things to be facts when they're not. I mean, go back and look at some of the public statements made by the three people now running the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI: Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, and Pam Bondi, all Trump acolytes is kind of a negative word, but it's an appropriate word. They're all acolytes.
But I'm not defending that kind of madness, and I'm not like getting into that. I'm just saying that I think that there are a lot of conversations in America, and we have them in Ireland as well, worth having, that were ridiculed and blocked from being had at all in previous administrations. And I'm into some of those conversations being had and some of those investigations being done, be they on health. And if those investigations come to nothing, I'm fine with that. Fine.
Okay, well, we're now over 6 months.
Yeah.
We're now over 6 months into the Trump administration. We have, I mean, of all those conversations that you want to have, I mean, how many of them have borne fruit so far?
I think there's definitely conversations being had on a different level than was ever had before about American food, vaccines, health. 100%.
I'm not entirely sure that any of them have actually borne fruit or resulted in any change.
All right. Well, I think there's conversations. I think that since Trump became president, there's conversations that have been had about men and women's sports. I think that's borne fruit. I think that conversation would have never happened if Trump hadn't been elected. That would have been quietly just gone away.
I'm not attacking the entire Trump administration, by the way. I'm attacking the specific idea that you're kind of saying that, like, it's good to have conversations all the time and it's good to direct government resources towards conversations. I mean, I agree with you on the trans stuff. But like,
investigations, not conversations, investigations.
The problem with this stuff, this let's just have a conversation stuff, is that it legitimizes an awful lot of nonsense. Because you can do it in relation to anything. Let's just have a conversation about whether the world is flat. Let's investigate that. Let's have a conversation about chemtrails. I mean, chemtrails is the next one. People absolutely, there's an army of people out there who believe that commercial airliners are being used to engage in, and they'll be in the comments below this podcast on YouTube, a lot of them, and they'll be saying things like, I believe that the commercial airliners are releasing chemicals into the environment as part of a global plan to alter and change the climate. And they firmly believe that. And I mean, the only thing I say in relation to that is that if that is true, for example, you have to establish, if you want me to take something seriously, then you have to establish a framework of plausibility. Like, how are these chemicals being brought to the aircraft responsible? How many people globally are involved in this? Literally, how many people globally are involved in this, and how many of those people have ever gone on the record? And if you're seriously telling me that there's a global conspiracy to change the climate by releasing chemicals into the sky, then I need an explanation for how the at least 600,000-700,000 people globally involved in this, down to the level of people who load the chemicals into the tanker, no one has ever come forward and said, I'm involved in this. That's extraordinary. And if you can't explain this, then I don't think it's worthy having a conversation. That's my view. Call me naive, but that's my view.
But you're picking one thing. I'm saying that some of these things aren't, and some of these things, there is a public desire to investigate them. Like you're picking.
No, go ahead.
You're picking chemtrails and saying, but what I'm saying is that I think for a long, long time, there's deep suspicion amongst the public, for example, about vaccines, even before COVID, and links between vaccines and other things, and whether or not vaccines cause X, Y, or Z. And I think that somebody getting into the job that Robert F. Kennedy is in and saying that they're going to investigate this and determine whether or not, where, what, when, is a good thing. I think it's reassuring for a public, and I think if it yielded nothing and there is an investigation done that yields no result and that there is no connection, well, so be it. But
That won't
the
happen,
alternative was we just continue with this bullshit of nothing, and anybody who says anything about vaccines is mental.
But
That's what
that
we've
won't
lived in for
happen.
years.
That won't happen. I mean, it won't happen. This is the problem. We bring it back to the Epstein thing. There is not one person, I promise you this, there is not one person alive who firmly believed at the beginning of this week that there's been a massive Epstein cover-up, who now in their heart of heart accepts that there wasn't. And the investigation, all the people who said they'd investigated, go into government, they do the investigation, and they come out and say, actually, all was kosher here. He did kill himself and there wasn't a whole list of clients. Do those people now accept the results? No, they don't. And when you say, oh, let's ask the questions about vaccines, if Robert F. Kennedy did an investigation into the COVID vaccines and he came out with the results, actually the COVID vaccines were safe, how many people, I'm not including you, would actually accept those results? Or would they instead do what the conspiracy theorist always does and say, well, I think RFK was compromised, or look at the people he appointed to do that investigation, they might have been compromised, or they were got at. Because the thing about a conspiracy theory is that it's unfalsifiable. And the thing that drives me absolutely demented in the job that I do, which is to try and run a news website that is trying to investigate things from a factual matter and report things factually, is the laziest form of thinking, is the I'm just asking questions form of thinking. It's the, what do you know? I mean, I'm just asking, can we have a conversation about this? Can we look into it? And that means that you never have to provide evidence for your position. You never have to provide a fucking shred of evidence for your position when you're the person who's just saying, well, I'm just asking questions. Can I have a conversation? I think if you're making big claims in the world, like, there's a cover up in relation to Epstein, they're seeding the clouds. The vaccines are targeted to reduce fertility. You have a fucking obligation to come out with actual evidence that supports your position. You don't just say, well, I'm just asking questions and I demand that other people answer them. And by the way, I won't accept their answers when they come forward.
Hold on, John, but like if you're like a Joe Public or whatever, you don't have access to the information that will identify whether or not vaccines, like this business of like, the option isn't, you said something there, you said, vaccines will turn out to be safe. The options aren't safe and not safe. The truth is that vaccines, like, every vaccine as it is has a risk factor. That's a fact. You can get a vaccine injury from the flu vaccine. That's always been the case. It's very rare, but it happens. It's a fact. So the question is not, I'm not talking about a conspiracy theory where somebody thinks that, Microsoft put a chip into everybody who got the vaccines. I'm talking about potentially a situation where that vaccine had a higher risk of myocarditis, et cetera, than other flu vaccines for whatever reason, or, it had a higher risk of something else. It might still be only 1% or 2% or whatever, but that's the kind of information that's worth knowing about, worth investigating. I'm not talking about mad off the wall shit. I'm just talking about people are suspicious. There's a lot of talk, and I think maybe like the truth or the best option is somewhere in the middle. And okay, maybe you don't think Robert Kennedy is the guy to do it, or that he's going to do it, or that it's going to be the type of investigation or whatever. But the alternative to that was just a constant gaslighting, no investigation, and anybody who asked any questions just being put into a box of being mental. And I'm not down for that.
No, nor am I.
But where's we're talking about options available to us, and I'm saying that,
look,
the Robert F. Kennedy thing, I'm there for it because that's the only show in town in terms of somebody who's going to actually ask hard questions about some of this stuff. And you're saying he's too mental and this will never come to anything, so why bother?
Well, look,
So
because
in your scenario, we get nothing. And in my scenario, we book up because we've got a shot in hell of getting something with the only show in town.
No. You see, I think it's much more nuanced than that. I hate that word nuance because it kind of sounds like you think you're smarter than other people. That's not what I think at all. But I do think what it actually means is that there's differences between different examples. So, for example, let's talk about the COVID vaccines. Let's talk about the AstraZeneca vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine was the most administered. It was effectively the British manufactured vaccine. It was the one that was most administered in the UK. It was initially administered heavily in Ireland. It was ironically the only COVID vaccine marketed in this part of the world that didn't use the mRNA technology. It was a traditional form of vaccine. And as that vaccine was rolled out, it rapidly became apparent that there was an issue with the AstraZeneca vaccine and quite severe blood clotting in a number of cases. There were a number of recorded deaths. There were a number of recorded severe adverse events. There was a vaccine evening held in Dunleary a week or two ago by Aintu Representative Mairead Tobin, in which a woman came forward and actually talked about this. She said, I got the AstraZeneca vaccine, I suffered clotting. And that's an established link. It was then established. They went away and they investigated it at European level, at regulatory level. And do you know what happened? The AstraZeneca vaccine was phased out of use because that flaw was established. That has happened. That's a real thing. And then people who see that happening, I mean, I think they have a right, by the way. I think people who are mandated to take the AstraZeneca vaccine and got clots have a real right to be angry and a real right to take legal action and a real right to be compensated. But the idea that we can't distinguish between the safety record of the AstraZeneca vaccine, where a particular issue was shown to be the case and the vaccine was pulled, and the other vaccines, which I just think proved to be remarkably ineffective, but there's no evidence of widespread harm in the same way as there is there. I think it's not that hard to provide evidence supporting your position. And I think in relation to a lot of these questions, people don't do it, and instead they say, I'm just asking questions, somebody else can go and get the evidence.
I think what you're leaning towards is that you just don't bother asking. I mean, if we're talking about Robert F. Kennedy, there's the COVID vaccine questions, there's the 80 something vaccines that children in America get. Like, I just think these are all things that are worth investigation. Why did the, I think in the 10 years between 2010 and 2020, I'd have to look this up, but the amount of vaccines that were given as standard to children in America doubled. Why? Was there an outbreak of diseases we didn't hear about? No, it's because because it's money.
But I don't know. Look, maybe the difference between you and I on this issue is that you've got children and I don't. And I recognize that's an important thing. And I recognize the instinct to, in both mothers and fathers, by the way, to protect their children and their offspring. But I try and look at the evidence. And the evidence is, you can say there are too many, you come here and you say, we're giving, American kids are getting 80 different vaccines. There must be something terrible happening there, or there may be something there, we should investigate it. And I say, if you look at child mortality today in the United States versus child mortality in the United States in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, when people were getting far fewer vaccinations, it has dramatically improved. And a lot of the diseases that are being vaccinated against now are no longer killing children, and that's broadly a good thing. And I think if you want to come forward and say...
No, I'm sorry. That's nonsense. So what you're saying is that because more children died a long, long time ago and today, that means those vaccines are better. But those vaccines, there's not a big, huge drop-off in children dying in the period in which those vaccines doubled. Like, I'm not saying you don't vaccinate your children. I vaccinated my children. But I certainly wouldn't be signing my child...
I'm also trying to put words in your mouth on that, by the way. But
I'm not. But I certainly wouldn't be bringing my child down to the GP clinic in Portmarnock and vaccinating them against dengue fever when they're not going to be in Asia and they don't need it. And
that's fair.
And it's not about. This is the trap all the time. It's not about, are vaccines a good thing? And if you say anything that you disagree with that, well, then you just are anti-vax. It's not about that. It's about, yes, vaccines are a good thing. Yes, vaccines have reduced child mortality and diseases in children massively or whatever. But it's about how many, how often, when, and are they all necessary? There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And adding vaccines on top of vaccines on top of vaccines on top of vaccines for children for things that they are highly unlikely to get is not the same as saying, oh, well, I just don't agree with vaccinations in general. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, if your child gets meningitis, you should give them cayenne pepper and honey and water and it'll be all good. But that's the boxing that's done to people. I'm just saying, is it necessary to give all of the vaccines, like particularly in America? There's way more vaccines in America than there is in the Irish protocol. Is there some difference of diseases in America that we don't know about in Ireland? Why is there so many vaccines? I don't have any problem with him investigating that. And I'm sorry, but like,
Yeah, all I'm saying on this one is that if you are going to come forward with a proposition that the government should look into something, and you're starting from the proposition that there's something wrong here, but we can't put our finger on it, there should be an investigation. I'm saying that can't be your starting point. Your starting point can't be...
That's the starting point, John. That's the starting point of half of the investigations that have ever been done into anything. We don't have the full information, but there's a suspicion that there's X. Please, can the person who has all of the resources available to them do an investigation into it? And then they do, and it turns out that the public were true. We're
but
right.
a suspicion has to be
So
based
what you're
on
saying is that the public have to go to the government with a dossier of all their facts and figures before the government should do anything about it.
No, but I'm saying there has to be some kind of observational relationship that can be established before you expect people to take it seriously. I mean, and the problem is when you don't have that, then any person can rock up and say, I think the government should investigate whether the airlines are actually, fixing the climate with the stuff that comes out the back of the plane, which is a widely believed thing.
You keep going back to the chemtrails thing because what it's doing is you're trying to create the impression that the people who wanted the government to investigate anything are mental.
No, I'm not trying to say that they are mental.
No. Keep going back to chemtrails.
If you want to say that, if you believe in chemtrails, you say it. But what I'm saying,
that's not what I said. You are putting words in my mouth.
What I am saying is that you have to, if you want your argument to be taken seriously, you've got to make a serious argument. And your argument can't just be, I think there's something dodgy here, I think we should investigate. Like with the Epstein thing is the perfect example of that. Essentially the argument has always amounted to, I think there was something dodgy there, I need to know the truth. And then the problem is when that becomes your argument, it becomes somebody else's responsibility to do your thinking and you're investigating for you, and you never have to be satisfied with the results, which is why I come back to it. There ain't a damn person alive who will look at this new evidence from the Americans who've gotten what they wanted and put out the information who actually believes it, because the thing about conspiracy theories is that they are unfalsifiable. They're unfalsifiable. It's like the joke about the guy who goes the whole way to heaven, having spent his whole life looking into the JFK, who shot JFK thing, and he finally gets up there and St. Peter says, can I ask one question? And he says, yeah, in you go, ask God the question. And he says, God, who shot JFK? And God says, it was Lee Harvey Oswald with a single bullet. And the guy turns around, shakes his head and goes, this goes right to the very top. That is the kind of the problematic kind of thinking that happens when you don't require evidence beyond it's somebody else's obligation to look into this for me. That's all I'm saying.
And
anyway, we spent a whole half hour on this.
Yeah. It's good. And after saying it was a slow news week, then we have a good ding dong there.
Well, I hope listeners enjoyed it, and I hope both of us made some points that people can latch onto.
If there's anybody listening who has a conspiracy that they'd like to expose, please forward your folders with your tabbed and indexed information, Excel spreadsheets, etc., to John McGurk at Gript Media so that he can peruse over it in advance of being submitted to government and check if it's okay.
You get a good few of those in, actually. And by the way, it's not just Gript that gets them in. I've talked to some of my colleagues in the rest of the media, and they come in fairly frequently. And a lot of them actually are very sad. You do get a lot of very sad cases that come in of people who, for whatever reason, have given their life to pursuing, say, a land dispute, and between them and a neighbor or them and a family member, and after 20 years, they're in the position where they now believe that the courts are against them, the Gardaí against them, the media are against them, the administration against them, the civil services against them, the county council is against them, and that they've all ganged up on them, when in actual fact they've just lost the case. And they should move on. And there's no talking to those people either, sadly. And it ruins lives. It ruins lives, Sarah. You see it, and you see it happening in the court sometimes with people who, and you probably have more experience than me than this, people who come in and represent themselves in court and believe in theories of sovereign citizen and all the rest of it that have no legal basis, and they ruin their lives. And the worst bit is there's a whole group of people standing on there cheering them ruin their lives. So I do think conspiracy theories do real harm to people. And that's
Yeah,
one of
but
the
not
reasons why I don't like them.
okay.
What, you're
Really.
going to say something? Say it.
No,
I'm not
it's
censoring
fine.
you.
It's fine. I'm just, obviously the deep state has gotten to you too, John.
There are people who believe that. I mean, there's a look. I think this is a real issue. It's a real issue in society. I talk about it, the kind of like no one can disagree with me unless they're being paid to kind of attitude. I have been accused since I've been doing this job of mine for the last 6 years, in which time we've built Gript up. But I've been accused of being paid by NATO, the Israelis,
I see the
the
Israelis one a
Russians
lot. Yeah.
at one point. Yeah, I mean, people have this thing where if you disagree with them, somebody must be funding you. You must be getting money because no rational person could possibly disagree with them. So you must be just getting paid by somebody.
Yeah.
And it's a really destructive way of thinking because, I mean, it means that you don't consider the possibility that people might have an opposing argument to you. And that means you're just going to lose the argument. And if you're going to resort to, you must be getting paid all the time. Look, just don't do it. If that's my advice. But anyway, I probably pissed the audience off so much at this stage that they're not going to take my advice and they've already decided. Somebody underneath the comments of this YouTube video, or on Spotify or wherever else you're leaving comments, because I know some of you, a loyal few, leave comments on Spotify and ratings to the podcast, which we really appreciate. But somebody has already written, before they've reached this sort of 35-minute mark, somebody has already written below the line that I'm being paid by Big Pharma to take the position that I've just taken. Guaranteed. Anyway, will we move on? Let's talk about something that we can agree on. And you mentioned to me before the podcast started, let's talk about Javier Milei down in Argentina. He's been doing well, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't know it, would you? So Javier Milei is the president of Argentina, for anyone who doesn't know. And UNICEF came out today or yesterday and said that 2.4 million children have escaped poverty since he took office. So, that's good news, not that you would know. But there's also, there's loads of other things that have happened with Milei that it's just like to cast people's minds back. When he was running for office, the narrative in the Irish media was that he was the, Satan and Argentina would be ruined and he was the far right and he was terrible and he was awful and he was whatever. And the results that are now starting to be seen in Argentina under his watch are quite, not shocking in a bad way, but like shocking in an amazing way. So one of the other things that I saw this week was that rent has dropped by 40% in real term, and the supply of rental properties in Buenos Aires has increased by over 300% as a result of Milei abolishing all forms of rent control. I find it fascinating that as a country who is in the housing crisis that we're in, with rent prices and rent issues and rent control in our capital city, that's not even thrown out by any journalist, just for, as you hate, just for the discussion.
Well, I don't hate discussions. I hate discussions that aren't based on sort of factual and observable evidence. And there is factual and observable evidence down in Argentina. I know you were joking. And it was taken in good humor. But there's factual evidence down in Argentina that things are moving in the right direction. Now, there are some people, and I saw one of my very valued and appreciated writers during the week, Theo McDonald, who writes for other publications as well, but also writes for Gript. And we were grateful to have him. But I saw him suggest, for example, that the figures that rent has fallen in Argentina is not entirely accurate because that's measured in US dollars, and inflation, for example, in Argentina is still at 40%. And there has been some upheaval. But this is the thing, inflation is down from 300 or 400% when he took office, and it's going in the right direction. I think he's been an unqualified success. And the reason, by the way, if you want to know how much of a success Javier Milei has been, ask yourself how many articles in the Irish Times have you read about him? If this is a guy who when the election was on, he was portrayed as a right-wing, chainsaw-wielding, absolute lunatic who was likely to drive Argentina into, if not bankruptcy, I mean, we'd be lucky that people wouldn't be eating their neighbors to survive if he got elected. That was the tone of the coverage during the election. Now he gets elected and all of a sudden he just disappears from the Irish media. That tells you how well he's doing. Because if he was doing badly, if Argentina was basket case, was moving in the wrong direction, I mean, I guarantee you, oh yeah, RTE would have a reporter in Buenos Aires.
Yeah,
they would. There'd be footage of the protests on the streets. There would be sober head shaking in Dublin about the risks of right-wing lunacy, and they'll just look what's happened in Argentina. The fact that they're all quiet about it, that's how you know it's actually gone really well for the lad. But I also think it's really interesting, though, Sarah, and this is again. I mean, I'm often accused of sort of picking fights with people on my own side, but I do think it's important to recognize things. Like Milei has succeeded in Argentina by doing pretty much the opposite economically to what the Trump administration has been doing in the US. Pretty much the opposite. He's pursued free trade, lower taxes, deregulation of the housing market. You see a lot of the nationalist right in Ireland, they don't want to do that sort of stuff. They're going in the opposite direction. And I think it's notable that Javier Milei sort of economically is much closer to those most hated of individuals, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, than he is to the sort of titans of the right elsewhere in the world today.
Yeah.
I think that point has to be made.
Yeah, but I also think ultimately, you know, what Milei is doing in Argentina is what Milei thinks is best for Argentina and all of the unique circumstances that surround Argentina and what bad shape the country has been in for a long time before he came in, etc., etc., etc. The point that I find interesting from a political point of view about him is, as you say, is the silence, is the like not every policy that Milei is implementing in Argentina would work in Ireland or America or whatever. And I take your point that you're bringing up Trump again because they have that syndrome, but I'm just in the Irish context, I think that like some of the things that he has done, like rent controls and things like that, or abolishing rent controls or whatever, are worthy of consideration in Ireland. And because they are the opposite of what our mainstream media would like to talk about or like to do, evidence of them working in Argentina is just never, ever, ever brought up here. And
I think the media...
I take your point that, you know, some things are that nationalists and right wing governments wouldn't do what he's doing, whatever. But I just think that like all just like park all the political sort of philosophy for a second and just being open minded and not being so rigid about, you know, what it does or doesn't work. And in the context of Ireland in particular, acknowledging that whatever we've been doing with housing for the last 10 years hasn't worked. And here's something that is, and we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to acknowledge, or not us, our media doesn't want to acknowledge it. I think that's really troubling.
I'll stick up for the Irish media in this one limited respect. I don't think they're primarily, I mean, they're to blame for not covering Milei. And I don't think that's to do, I actually don't think they're not covering Milei because they don't approve of his housing policy. I think it's as simple as Javier Milei is right-coded, he's right-wing, he must be bad, and if he's doing well, we're not covering it because it might encourage right-wingers elsewhere. I don't actually think it's because they oppose his housing policy specifically. And I don't think they're to blame on the housing policy because I think, and since I've been playing the absolute villain in this podcast for a section of the audience from the beginning, I'm going to continue it. I think it is because there is very low levels of economic literacy amongst the Irish population. And I think there are very good reasons for that. I think our electoral system is to blame. I think we have, for years, elected politicians on the basis of what they do locally. There has never been much of a debate nationally about economic policy. It has always been sort of like the centrist, middle, common sense way and the radical, dreamy lefties. That's kind of the extent of a debate we've ever had in economic policy in Ireland. People have never been exposed really to ideological choices around housing. And I think in Ireland, if you were to set up a party tomorrow and you were to say, what I want to do now is the entirely sensible thing of abolishing rent controls and deregulating the housing market, I think, you know, you would have a cadre of not even the Paul Murphys of the world, just regular ordinary folks kind of going, oh, you're for the landlords, you want the landlords to get more money. And I think you'd end up getting about 5% of the vote. I think that's where we're at in the country because we don't have an economically literate electorate who can distinguish between people getting rich at an individual level and what's good for society at large. That I'm just going to say it. Right? That's what I think. Do you think I'm wrong?
Well, yeah, obviously I do, but I mean, I don't think I I don't think you can blame the public for bad policy for being economically illiterate. I mean, we elect politicians to come up with policy and to communicate, if necessary, that policy in a way that's understanding. And like, forget all that. We just elect people to implement policies that work. And if you're somebody who's looking to rent somewhere in Dublin, in particular, and I know people will get annoyed that I'm only focusing on Dublin, but I live in Dublin, and Dublin, as far as I understand it, is one of the highest rents in the country. And you're looking to rent, like, it's completely out of control. And you're having to live with multiple other people, etc., etc., etc. That's been going on for years. That's not working. I don't think you can just say, oh, well, if the public were a bit more economically literate, they'd elect better people for that. No, I think that's a government, that the blame for that is solely at the government.
Yeah, for sure. But that's ultimately we elect a government that believes certain things.
Yeah, but
and
we
the public
don't.
have consistency.
But we don't elect the government just for one thing. Like, I vote for on one aspect of what I want the government to deliver for me. You vote on something else, etc., etc., etc. So, but the point is that we still are not to blame for their failure to implement or have a kind of a broader mind, or a better perspective, or a better suite of ideas on how to solve a problem that's been going on. That's not our fault. That's their fault.
I know it is. It's absolutely our fault. It's absolutely our fault. No, the most popular political sentiment in Ireland, and this is the one, and I mean, this is actually the one that gets you nods in rooms of sensible people. When you talk about this, is, oh, I wouldn't be ideological now. I wouldn't go in for that sort of stuff. I just take the best ideas from both sides. I see myself as being in the middle. And they think that's a kind of deep thinking, when in actual fact, it's just a form of intellectual atrophy. You're just refusing to take a position or have a coherent view of the world. And the Irish voter refuses to take. I mean, to full credit to the people who actually vote for Labour, Social Democrats, the Greens. They're about 15% of the electorate, and they're the only slice of the Irish electorate that has a coherent view of the world. It happens to be, in my view, the wrong one, but it's a coherent view of the world. The problem is you can't solve housing without a coherent view of the world. You need to understand how the market works. You need to understand how basic economics works. You need to understand how supply and demand works. You need to understand that people making money in times of high demand and low supply is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because it drags more people into the market to make money themselves. That's why Milei getting rid of rent caps has actually worked. He's dragged people who want to supply housing into the market in Argentina. He's some people who live in Buenos Aires have discovered they don't need to live there and can move out to their second homes and rent their main home for a profit, and it's worked. In Ireland, people, your neighbour making money off a rental house is seen as a bad thing in Ireland, and that's a problem. That's what I think. I'm sorry.
I still think the responsibility for changing a culture around how we view housing is on the government, not on an electorate that's inevitably going to be fragmented in why and how they vote. Can't blame it. I mean, you're just letting them off the hook. 10 years or more of bad policy on housing has led to where we are.
But I've written that piece a dozen times, Sarah. I've written the 10 years of bad policy.
It doesn't make it less true.
I wrote a piece last week. It didn't mention Milei. I wrote a piece for Gript last week, or maybe it was the week before, in which I explicitly said and made the argument, rent caps are a disaster and should be abolished. And people didn't like it. Like, our own subscribers, they didn't like it. They were like, no, we like the rent caps. We don't want landlords making loads of money. Thanks very much. They liked it. I mean, people have a right to obviously disagree with me, and there's no issue with that. But I don't think it's a simple case of, if only we had politicians to make the case, people would change their mind. I don't think it is. I think also the other thing you have to remember is, historically in Ireland, going back to the sort of the penal law times and evictions, we have a really deep cultural chip on our shoulder about landlords.
Yeah.
We really do here. In a way that's just
colonial. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I don't know. Anyway, I think we can both agree Milei is doing very well in Argentina, and he should be studied, and he's not being studied. So that's an interesting thing. Anyway, do you want to have the women in the home referendum again?
I mean, I don't think that that's going to actually happen. And I was very warm and fuzzy and comforted by the public reaction to the very idea of it. But I think is it not the Irish way to have a second referendum on every referendum where we don't like the result? I don't see any scenario where it's not getting absolutely annihilated if it's run again. It'll probably do worse.
Well, Simon Harris, for the record, says there are no circumstances in which it's being run again, at least in the
Yeah.
lifetime of this government, showing that he hasn't lost all sense.
He's too busy. They're too busy reigniting the hate speech bill. But yeah,
I don't think they're going to do that either, by the way. I just don't. I don't know. Maybe they will, because they're not doing anything else. It's a very ineffective, very inefficient government. But apart from the Occupied Territories bill, I can't actually think of a significant piece of legislation they are doing. But they're not going to do that. I don't think, the hate speech bill or this.
Anyway, I don't see it. I think it was a PR disaster for the government at the time, and I think they'd be very loath to get back involved with that kind of conversation. But I could be wrong. What do you think?
No, it's not going to happen. But I think it's an example of how liberal ideas never die. They just never die. And how the other side is utterly relentless. I remember, it's interesting. When liberals win, when they advance the football in American football terms, where the objective is to advance the ball down a pitch a few yards at a time. When they advance the ball a few yards down the pitch at a time, that's it. It's over. You can have as many referendums as you want on divorce until they get the right answer, and then divorce is enshrined forever. Now, I happen to agree that it should be, but that's besides the point. Same thing is on gay marriage. The same thing is on abortion. The same thing on, the children's rights referendum. Once liberals get a win, the issue goes away. It is settled forever. Society has moved forward. We will never go back. There's no turning back. And when they lose, it is simply a case of, well, maybe, there's still a case for some reform here. We'll come back and look at it. People forget that the 1986 and 1995 divorce referendums were 9 years apart. They waited and they came back. The abortion referendums in 2002 and 2018, 16 years apart. They will come back to this issue. Liberal ideas never die. And I don't say that to be a pessimist. I say that because it is symptomatic of how there is a fundamental need to not just defeat liberals at the ballot box, but to drastically reduce their power right across society, in academia, in journalism, in the civil service, in all these places of influence that you don't control. In the media being one of them, which is the reason we founded Gript, and I hope that it continues growing long after I'm gone, because not that I'm going anytime soon, but because I think it is necessary to challenge the cultural space, because winning a political battle doesn't win you the war. That's the lesson of this stuff.
But also just to look at a very basic level, that everybody, you're talking about voters and voters understanding how, but for a society to be functional, that society should hear alternative views. And before Gript and a few years ago, that just wasn't the case in Ireland. That there was one view, and there was lots of views, but there was one culture, one angle on everything, and it was one way, and there wasn't any alternate. And I think that that's really, really, really bad for a society.
Yeah, well, I think it is. In the media space, I think that is changing a little bit. In fairness, it should be noted. I won't sit here and say that Gript is claiming credit for, I think, the slight shift in a more positive direction that's happened over the last 5 years, because there have been lots of other people who have been working diligently. I think, for example, the emergence of Aontú Independent Ireland in the political space has been really important. I think David Quinn toiled away for years in the Iona Institute when it was really unpopular to do so, and fought some really important battles. And he lost a lot of them, but he fought them, and he fought them well. And there are many, many others. So I don't want to take the view, but I'm just saying that I think what we're doing is in the media space, and I think that needs to be replicated in the academic space. It needs to be replicated in a whole host of other spaces. Because I don't want to use the word enemy, because I don't think you should say that unless you're actually in a military capacity. But our opposition, our opponents, never rest and they never give up. And they understand, by the way, like everyone understands that the United Nations is not an organization to represent the world's nations. It is a liberal organization that is devoted to advancing progressive liberal social policy across the Western world. That's what it does. That's what it does in every committee, and that's what it will continue to do. And that's why it gets taken seriously by the media, because there are people in liberal positions in the media who regard the UN as respectable. That's like, that's not a conspiracy theory. There's actual evidence for that.
Yeah.
And it's one where I think, it will require many years of dedicated effort to reverse because it's gone so far.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's pessimistic. And I think this, to bring the conversation back to where we started, this is what really frustrates me about people chasing dead ends. Like, fight the fight that's in front of you. Fight the important fight. Go and win the battles that are there to be won, rather than chasing fucking shadows about Jeffrey Epstein and chemtrails and, fluoride in the water and all this other utter nonsense that people waste their time with because they decide that they can't trust what they're reading, so therefore they're going to believe whatever nonsense somebody says on the internet. It drives me utterly insane because there's a fight that is there to be won and is winnable, and you're ignoring it to go down rabbit holes. I mean, you can do that. You can do that. You can waste your time doing it, but it is a waste of time. That's what I think.
I think
that you was not directed at you specifically.
I think chemtrails shit in your cornflakes this morning.
I just think it's it's not, look, if somebody comes to me and says, here's actual evidence of it. I mean, look, the certainly it is true that various governments have looked and investigated the possibility of cloud seeding, for example. I mean, there are examples of them doing it in the Middle East, cloud seeding to produce rain in arid countries. I don't think it's a particularly good idea to mess with the climate that way, but there are examples of it. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the widespread idea that people look up into the sky and they see a plane going past and they see contrails of water vapor coming off the tips of the wings or condensation from the engine exhausts. And they say, no, that's not what it looks like. That's actually people putting chemicals to control the climate into the sky, and they've been doing it for years. That's what I object to. You need evidence for that, and it's not there, which is why it's a good example, I think. But, people will hate me for saying that. There will be the chemtrail fans will dominate the comments this week. They definitely will. And they're not the regulars, but they will come in. They're like, I remember in about 2012 when I was on Twitter and I criticized a cyclist, and I was still getting replies. So, the cyclists don't like being criticized.
I said something about cyclists one time on Twitter. I said I had to block about 25 people.
Yeah, I was still getting replies 5 years later. Yeah.
I was like, guys, chill out. You know what I mean? I'm all for cycling, but some of you are just super annoying sometimes. That's all.
Yes, but as they will tell you, Sarah, that when they're annoying. When we drivers of German cars are annoying, they're killed. That's what they say. And in fairness, they've got a point. I think being a cyclist is a very dangerous thing, particularly in cities, particularly with large lorries about the place. And they've got a point. But at the same time, lads, learn to take a joke in good humor. Anyway, there was lots we didn't get to this week because we initially decided we'd have a quick chat of the Epstein thing and move on, and then turned into a half-hour argument about conspiracy theories, vaccines, the whole shebang, which we hope you enjoyed, even if it made you angry. But if it made you keep listening, then it was obviously a conversation that you found worthwhile. And we hope to continue having so many worthwhile conversations. And can I just say, whether you agree with me or whether you agree with Sarah, we do value the fact that you listen to us. We value the fact that you watch us, those of you who watch on YouTube. I know Sarah values all the compliments she got last week for her glasses, which are superior to mine. And
we will, and by the way, if in the future, a photo emerges of a chemtrail shooting JFK from the grassy knoll with the Epstein list in one hand and the vaccination in the other, we will revisit that topic.
Oh yeah, you are a woman, aren't you? And because you're a woman, that means that your favorite 4 words are "I told you so." So,
well, I haven't pointed out all the other times you were wrong about Trump and stuff.
You just did. You just
No, I
literally
didn't.
did.
It was like about 15 political predictions you made that were all wrong. I'm only naming one. I'm being sound.
We will do the review of John's predictions for the year at the end of the year, as is customary. I think you'll find that 15 of them were not wrong because there were only 10. But we'll see. We'll get to it. Anyway, from my dear friend Sarah and from me, it's been another episode of The Week That Really Was. We'll see you this time next week. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the heat wave. Don't get burnt, and beware of that climate change, which is all around us and is making the sun hit 24 degrees in Ireland. Talk to you soon.